Mexican cartels in the USA. The rise of Mexican drug cartels in the United States has transformed organized crime, fueling an epidemic of violence, addiction, and corruption. Among these cartels, the Sinaloa Cartel and Jalisco New Generation Cartel, CJNG, stand out as the most powerful, influencing not only Mexico, but also the U.S. drug trade. These organizations operate with military precision, using extreme violence, bribery, and advanced logistics to dominate the international narcotics market. Unlike traditional mafia-style crime groups that relied on secrecy and loyalty, modern cartels leverage global networks, technology, and ruthless enforcement tactics to maintain control over billion-dollar enterprises. Mexican cartels' presence in the U.S. is extensive, stretching from the southwest border to major urban centers like Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, Houston, Atlanta, and Miami. They do not operate as isolated entities but rather form alliances with local street gangs, prison gangs, and independent distributors to ensure their products flood American streets. The cartels are responsible for the fentanyl crisis, heroin epidemic, and methamphetamine trade, making them the largest suppliers of illicit drugs in the United States. The Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, considers them the greatest organized crime threat to the country, as they continue to adapt to law enforcement crackdowns, using innovative smuggling techniques, high-powered weaponry, and even social media to expand their influence. The Sinaloa Cartel, once led by Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, remains one of the most dominant criminal organizations in the world. Despite Guzman's capture and imprisonment in the U.S., his cartel persists under the leadership of Ismael El Mayo Zambada and Guzman's sons, known as Los Chapitos. The cartel specializes in large-scale drug production and distribution, particularly fentanyl, heroin, cocaine, and methamphetamine. Sinaloa has infiltrated major American cities through a well-organized network of traffickers who operate discreetly while ensuring billions of dollars in narcotics reach American consumers. The organization also has a highly sophisticated money laundering network, utilizing businesses, real estate investments, and cryptocurrency to clean illicit funds. One of the cartel's most dangerous rivals, Cartel de Jalisco Nueva Generación, CJNG, has emerged as an even more violent and ambitious force. Led by Nemesio El Mencho Oseguera Cervantes, CJNG has aggressively expanded its presence in the U.S. and Mexico, known for its extreme brutality, including mass executions, beheadings, and high-tech assassination squads. Unlike the Sinaloa Cartel, which often relies on bribery to control officials, CJNG wages direct warfare against Mexican authorities, using armored vehicles, drones equipped with explosives, and elite mercenary units. In the U.S., CJNG traffics massive quantities of fentanyl and methamphetamine, primarily targeting California, Texas, and the Midwest. The DEA has labeled CJNG as one of the fastest-growing and most dangerous cartels, responsible for flooding the U.S. with highly lethal synthetic opioids that have caused record-breaking overdose deaths. Cartels do not function alone inside the U.S. Instead, they rely on collaborations with street gangs and prison organizations to distribute drugs and enforce their dominance. Groups such as MS-13, Latin Kings, Sureños, and Aryan Brotherhood act as local enforcers and distributors, ensuring that cartel shipments reach their final destinations. These gangs operate in major urban centers, selling cartel-supplied narcotics while carrying out contract killings, kidnappings, and extortion on behalf of their cartel partners. American law enforcement has made efforts to disrupt these networks, but the sheer financial power of the cartels makes it nearly impossible to eliminate them completely. The cartels use advanced smuggling techniques to move drugs across the U.S.-Mexico border. They utilize underground tunnels, submarines, drones, and hidden compartments in vehicles to evade law enforcement detection. Some of the most elaborate tunnels, discovered in California and Arizona, were equipped with lighting, ventilation, and rail systems to efficiently transport massive amounts of drugs. In recent years, cartels have also begun using commercial trucks, shipping containers, and even the U.S. Postal Service to move narcotics across state lines. Once inside the U.S., cartel-affiliated distributors process and package drugs for street-level sales, earning billions in illicit profits. One of the most alarming aspects of cartel influence in the U.S. is their role in the fentanyl crisis. Fentanyl, a synthetic opioid 50 times stronger than heroin, has caused an explosion in overdose deaths across America. Mexican cartels manufacture cheap, highly potent fentanyl-laced pills, often disguised as prescription painkillers, which are then smuggled into the U.S. and sold on the streets. The rise of fentanyl-related deaths, particularly among young Americans, has turned the crisis into a national emergency. Law enforcement agencies have launched multiple operations to intercept fentanyl shipments, yet cartels continue to produce and smuggle vast quantities into the country. The financial incentives are simply too great, with just a few grams of fentanyl capable of generating millions of dollars in revenue. Despite their power, cartels face increasing pressure from U.S. and Mexican law enforcement agencies. Joint operations have led to the capture of high-ranking cartel leaders, massive drug seizures, and asset forfeitures worth billions. However, the cartels quickly adapt to these disruptions, replacing arrested leaders with new figures and shifting their trafficking routes. The rise of encrypted communication apps, cryptocurrency transactions, and dark web marketplaces has allowed cartels to maintain their operations with minimal risk of detection. Some cartel factions have even begun investing in legitimate businesses such as real estate, transportation, and agriculture to further launder money and establish a legal front for their illicit activities. One of the biggest challenges in dismantling these organizations is corruption on both sides of the border. Cartels use their immense wealth to bribe law enforcement officers, border security personnel, and politicians, ensuring that key players remain on their payroll. In Mexico, entire police forces and government officials have been compromised by cartel money, making it nearly impossible to eliminate them. In the U.S., there have been cases of corrupt border agents and law enforcement officers assisting cartel operations in exchange for financial rewards. The level of infiltration is deeply concerning, making the fight against cartels a complex and dangerous battle. The future of cartel influence in the U.S. remains uncertain, but one thing is clear: these organizations are not going away anytime soon. Their ability to evolve, corrupt institutions, and exploit new technologies makes them one of the most significant threats to American society. With tens of thousands of deaths linked to drug overdoses and cartel violence each year, these organizations continue to profit from human suffering. The war on drugs has failed to dismantle them, and unless more aggressive measures are taken, Mexican cartels will remain a dominant force in the criminal underworld. The battle against cartels in the U.S. is not just about law enforcement. It is about addressing the deep-rooted economic, social, and political issues that allow these organizations to thrive. As long as there is demand for drugs in America, cartels will find a way to supply it, no matter how much blood is spilled in the process. Italian-American Mafia, La Cosa Nostra. The Italian-American Mafia, known as La Cosa Nostra, LCN, is one of the most infamous and historically significant organized crime groups in the United States. Originating from Sicilian mafia traditions brought by immigrants in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the American Mafia built an empire of crime, corruption, and violence. Unlike the street gangs or drug cartels that operate with brute force, La Cosa Nostra functions like a highly structured criminal corporation with a strict hierarchy, a code of silence known as omertà, and deep-rooted connections in politics, law enforcement, and legitimate business enterprises. Despite decades of law enforcement crackdowns, the mafia continues to operate, though in a more covert and sophisticated manner than in its heyday. At its peak in the mid-20th century, La Cosa Nostra controlled New York, Chicago, Philadelphia, Las Vegas, and several other major U.S. cities, exerting influence over gambling, labor unions, construction, and illicit enterprises. The mafia's power was so vast that it essentially controlled entire industries, such as waste management, trucking, and restaurant supply chains, ensuring that businesses had no choice but to pay protection money or face violent consequences. They infiltrated Hollywood, the music industry, and even U.S. government contracts, using extortion and bribery to manipulate powerful figures. The five families of New York, Gambino, Genovese, Lucchese, Bonanno, and Colombo, became the most dominant mafia organizations in the country. These families established themselves as criminal dynasties, passing leadership down through generations while enforcing their control with extreme violence. Each family had a boss, underboss, consigliere, capos, captains, soldiers, and associates, creating a chain of command that ensured secrecy and efficiency. Rivalries between these families often led to bloody mafia wars, resulting in high-profile murders and betrayals. One of the most critical elements of mafia power was its control over labor unions, particularly in construction, shipping, and trucking. Through bribery and intimidation, they gained control over teamsters, longshoremen, and garment industry unions, allowing them to demand inflated wages and contracts while skimming millions off the top. This influence extended to Las Vegas casinos, where mafia figures like Bugsy Siegel and Meyer Lansky played a crucial role in building the city's gambling empire. Millions of dollars were laundered through casinos, allowing the mafia to turn illegal profits into clean money while avoiding government scrutiny. The mafia also thrived on loan sharking, offering illegal loans at exorbitant interest rates. Those who failed to pay were subjected to brutal beatings, kidnappings, or even executions. The fear of mafia retaliation ensured that debts were always collected, making loan sharking one of the most profitable criminal enterprises. Alongside loan sharking, extortion and racketeering became essential revenue streams, with mafia enforcers demanding payments from local businesses in exchange for protection. Those who refused often faced firebombings, arson, and violent assaults. The mafia's involvement in illegal gambling and narcotics trafficking further expanded its wealth. While traditional mafia bosses were initially reluctant to enter the drug trade due to the high risk of law enforcement crackdowns, younger members saw it as a massively profitable opportunity. By the 1970s and 1980s, mafia factions were deeply involved in heroin and cocaine distribution, often working with Sicilian and South American drug traffickers. This expansion into narcotics brought both immense profits and increased law enforcement scrutiny, leading to major federal investigations. One of the most pivotal moments in the mafia's history was the FBI's crackdown during the 1980s and 1990s. Under RICO, Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations laws, federal prosecutors successfully dismantled mafia leadership structures by convicting bosses, underbosses, and key figures in organized crime. High-profile trials, wiretaps, and informants like Sammy the Bull Gravano helped bring down once powerful bosses, including John Gotti, the notorious head of the Gambino crime family. The mafia's power in the U.S. was significantly weakened by these convictions, forcing many families to go underground or scale back their operations. Despite these setbacks, La Cosa Nostra is still active today, albeit in a more discreet and calculated manner. The modern mafia focuses less on street-level violence and more on white-collar crimes, including money laundering, credit card fraud, stock market manipulation, cybercrime, and healthcare fraud. The decline of traditional union racketeering has led mafia families to adapt, shifting toward sophisticated financial crimes that are harder to detect and prosecute. New York remains the epicenter of mafia activity, with the five families continuing to operate, albeit with smaller crews and less public attention. While mafia bosses no longer command the same fearsome presence as in the days of Al Capone or Lucky Luciano, their influence can still be felt in construction contracts, underground gambling rings, and even Wall Street fraud schemes. Some families have also expanded into legitimate businesses, such as waste management, trucking, and real estate, using legal enterprises to launder illicit earnings while maintaining a foothold in criminal activities. One of the biggest challenges for law enforcement today is the mafia's ability to reinvent itself. Unlike Mexican cartels or street gangs that rely on open violence, the mafia has learned to operate in the shadows, keeping a lower profile while maintaining its criminal influence. Many high-ranking members avoid flashy lifestyles and instead blend into upper-class society, making them harder to detect and prosecute. The use of technology, encrypted communication, and offshore banking has further complicated efforts to dismantle modern mafia operations. The mafia's influence in politics and law enforcement remains a significant concern. Throughout history, they have bribed politicians, infiltrated police departments, and even placed insiders in government agencies. Corrupt officials have protected mafia interests in exchange for financial kickbacks, legal favors, and campaign support. While large-scale corruption cases have exposed some of these ties, the mafia's ability to manipulate political and legal systems remains a lingering threat. The legacy of La Cosa Nostra is deeply embedded in American crime history, and while its power has waned, it has not disappeared. The cultural impact of the mafia, portrayed in films like The Godfather and Goodfellas, has romanticized its criminal empire, but the reality is far more brutal. Murders, betrayals, and extortion have shaped its history, leaving behind a trail of destruction for those who opposed it. The FBI and other agencies continue to monitor mafia families, but their ability to survive for over a century proves that organized crime is never truly eradicated, only adapted. While the days of publicly powerful mafia bosses like John Gotti are over, La Cosa Nostra still exists, still profits, and still exerts influence, waiting for the right opportunity to regain its former strength. Russian Mafia, Bratva. The Russian Mafia, often referred to as Bratva, Brotherhood, is one of the most dangerous and sophisticated criminal organizations in the world. Emerging from the Soviet Union's brutal prison system and black market economy, the Russian Mafia quickly became a global powerhouse in organized crime, excelling in money laundering, arms trafficking, cybercrime, and human trafficking. Unlike traditional mafia groups that rely on strict family ties and territorial control, Bratva operates as a decentralized network, allowing it to adapt, evolve, and expand across multiple industries and continents. The roots of the Russian Mafia can be traced back to the early 20th century, when criminal gangs thrived under the rule of the Russian Empire. However, it was during the Soviet era that these organizations developed their notorious reputation. Under Joseph Stalin's dictatorship, thousands of criminals were sent to Gulag prison camps, where a unique and brutal criminal subculture, known as the Vori v Zakon, thieves-in-law, was born. These criminals followed a strict code, rejecting government authority, living by a set of tattooed ranks and criminal codes, and maintaining absolute loyalty to their criminal brothers. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, chaos erupted. The sudden shift from communism to capitalism created a lawless environment where corrupt politicians, ex-KGB agents, and brutal criminals seized power. Russia's transition to a market economy led to mass privatization, where former state-owned industries were taken over by organized crime syndicates, giving them control over oil, gas, and banking. By the mid-1990s, the Russian Mafia had transformed into a powerful, multi-billion-dollar criminal empire, controlling businesses, government officials, and entire economic sectors. The Russian mafia is structured differently from traditional organized crime groups. While the Italian mafia operates with familial loyalty and hierarchical leadership, the Bratva functions more like a loose federation of criminal networks, each with independent operations, but bound by common codes of secrecy and brutality. The mafia is deeply embedded in politics, intelligence, and business, allowing it to function almost as a shadow government in Russia and abroad. Its members include ex-military officers, former Soviet spies, politicians, businessmen, and highly skilled hackers. One of the most dangerous aspects of the Russian mafia is its involvement in cybercrime and financial fraud. Unlike traditional mafia groups that rely on drug trafficking and extortion, Russian criminals have mastered the art of stealing billions through digital fraud, ransomware attacks, and sophisticated money laundering schemes. Groups like Evil Corp, Revel, and Conti have been linked to high-profile cyber attacks on major financial institutions, corporations, and even government agencies. These cybercriminals hijack data, steal sensitive information, and demand massive ransoms, costing businesses billions of dollars annually. In addition to cybercrime, the Bratva is deeply involved in the international arms trade, often supplying military-grade weapons to terrorist organizations and rogue states. Following the collapse of the USSR, large stockpiles of Soviet-era weapons, including tanks, fighter jets, and missiles, went missing, many of which ended up in the hands of criminal organizations. The Russian mafia has been known to sell illegal arms to drug cartels, terrorist groups, and dictatorships, making them one of the most dangerous suppliers of illicit weaponry. Another major source of income for the Russian mafia is human trafficking and forced prostitution. Bratva controls vast networks of sex trafficking rings, smuggling women and children from Eastern Europe into the United States, Western Europe, and the Middle East. Victims are often lured with false job offers, kidnapped or sold into modern slavery, forced to work in brothels, strip clubs, and escort services under violent conditions. Law enforcement agencies have struggled to dismantle these operations due to Bratva's ability to corrupt officials, move victims across international borders, and operate discreetly. The brutality of the Russian mafia is unparalleled. Unlike other crime groups that may rely on strategic violence, Bratva operates with sheer ruthlessness, assassinating journalists, political opponents, and rival gang members without hesitation. One of the most infamous methods used by Russian mobsters is krysha, roofing, a form of extreme extortion where businesses, politicians, and even celebrities are forced to pay for protection or face deadly consequences. Those who refuse to comply often disappear mysteriously, are killed in car bombings, or are found dead in staged suicides. One of the biggest challenges in dismantling the Russian mafia is its deep connection to government and intelligence agencies. Unlike other organized crime groups that work outside the law, Bratva often works hand-in-hand with high-ranking officials, oligarchs, and even Russian intelligence services. There are strong allegations that Russian crime bosses fund political campaigns, influence elections, and conduct espionage activities on behalf of the state. Some reports even suggest that elements of the Russian government use organized crime groups to carry out assassinations and covert operations abroad. In the United States, the Russian mafia has a strong presence in cities like New York, Miami, Los Angeles, and Chicago, where they engage in real estate fraud, stock market scams, and high-tech crimes. Some of the most notorious criminal activities linked to Russian syndicates include Medicare fraud, stealing billions from the U.S. healthcare system, luxury car smuggling, art theft, and money laundering through high-end real estate investments. One of the most famous Russian mafia bosses, Semyon Mogilevich, known as the Brainy Don, is considered one of the most intelligent and elusive crime figures in history. He is wanted by the FBI for orchestrating large-scale financial crimes, arms trafficking, and drug smuggling. Mogilevich's empire is believed to stretch across Russia, Europe, Israel, and the U.S., making him one of the most powerful crime lords in the world. Despite numerous FBI investigations, sanctions, and crackdowns, the Russian mafia continues to flourish. Their ability to operate within the legal system, bribe officials, and adapt to new technology makes them extremely difficult to dismantle. Unlike the Italian mafia or street gangs, Bratva does not rely on traditional rackets. Instead, it controls industries, financial institutions, and even political figures, ensuring that their power remains untouchable. The future of the Russian mafia is even more concerning as technology advances and global conflicts provide new opportunities for criminal enterprises. With billions in illicit profits, deep government ties, and highly skilled members, Bratva remains one of the most powerful and terrifying criminal organizations on the planet. Their operations span cybercrime, financial fraud, human trafficking, and arms smuggling, making them not just a criminal threat, but a national security threat. While law enforcement agencies in the U.S. and worldwide continue to fight Russian organized crime, the reality is that Bratva has woven itself into the very fabric of global power structures. With government protection, limitless financial resources, and an ability to evolve, the Russian mafia is not just surviving, it is thriving. The Albanian Mafia. The Albanian Mafia is one of the most feared and rapidly expanding organized crime groups in the world, particularly in the United States, Europe, and the Balkans. Unlike traditional mafia structures such as the Italian Cosa Nostra or Russian Bratva, the Albanian Mafia operates through highly secretive, clan-based networks, making it extremely difficult to infiltrate and dismantle. Known for brutal violence, drug trafficking, human smuggling, and arms dealing, the Albanian Mafia has established itself as a dominant force in the global heroin trade, contract killings, and high-level corruption. One of the reasons the Albanian Mafia is so feared is its strict adherence to BESA, a code of honor, loyalty, and blood vengeance. This ancient tradition, originating from the Albanian highlands, dictates that any betrayal is met with immediate and often brutal retaliation. This principle ensures absolute secrecy, making the Albanian Mafia one of the most difficult criminal organizations to penetrate with informants or undercover agents. Unlike other mafia groups that are structured in a hierarchical system, Albanian crime families operate in tight-knit clans, often consisting of close relatives and childhood friends, reducing the risk of betrayal. The rise of the Albanian Mafia began in the 1990s, following the collapse of communism in Albania and the Yugoslav wars. During this period, Albania became a lawless state, with widespread poverty, corruption, and economic collapse, creating perfect conditions for organized crime to flourish. Thousands of Albanians fled to Western Europe and the United States, bringing with them a new brand of organized crime, one that was ultra-violent, highly disciplined, and impossible to infiltrate. Many of these criminals had previously been military-trained fighters, making them some of the most ruthless and effective killers in the underworld. One of the biggest sources of income for the Albanian Mafia is drug trafficking, particularly heroin and cocaine. The group has close ties to the Turkish and Afghan heroin suppliers, allowing them to dominate Europe's heroin trade, distributing massive quantities of narcotics through Italy, Germany, the UK, and the Netherlands. The Albanian Mafia has also expanded its operations into the United States, controlling drug distribution in cities such as New York, Chicago, Boston, and Detroit. Unlike other criminal organizations that rely on street gangs or middlemen to distribute drugs, the Albanian Mafia cuts out the intermediaries, handling every aspect of the trade, from smuggling to street-level sales, maximizing their profits while minimizing risk. In addition to drug trafficking, the Albanian Mafia is heavily involved in human trafficking and prostitution rings. Thousands of women and children are kidnapped, trafficked, and forced into prostitution across Western Europe and the U.S., with Albanian gangs controlling much of the illegal sex trade in Italy, Germany, France, and the United Kingdom. Victims are often lured under false pretenses, promised jobs as models or waitresses, only to find themselves trapped in a brutal world of forced prostitution and sexual slavery. Albanian crime syndicates have been linked to some of the largest human trafficking networks in Europe, generating billions of dollars annually from this industry alone. The Albanian mafia's ability to corrupt law enforcement and political figures has made it one of the most resilient criminal organizations in the world. In Albania and Kosovo, where government institutions are notoriously weak and corrupt, the mafia has infiltrated law enforcement agencies, political offices, and even international organizations, ensuring that their operations remain largely untouched. Reports indicate that Albanian crime lords have bribed high-ranking officials, allowing drug shipments, weapons smuggling, and human trafficking to continue with little interference. The mafia's connections extend into European banking systems, where billions of dollars in illicit funds are laundered through fake companies, offshore accounts, and real estate investments. One of the most terrifying aspects of the Albanian mafia is its reputation for extreme violence. Unlike traditional mafia groups that use violence as a last resort, Albanian gangs are known for executing rivals, witnesses, and even law enforcement officers without hesitation. Victims of Albanian crime groups are often tortured, mutilated, and publicly executed, serving as a warning to anyone who dares to betray or challenge their authority. Some of the most brutal murders in organized crime history have been attributed to Albanian hit squads, who are often ex-military fighters trained in assassination and guerrilla warfare. The Albanian mafia's expansion into the United States has been particularly concerning for law enforcement agencies, such as the FBI and DEA. Unlike the Italian mafia, which has a long-established presence in the U.S., Albanian crime groups have remained largely under the radar, avoiding the same level of scrutiny. However, intelligence reports indicate that Albanian syndicates have taken control of drug distribution in major American cities, working in alliance with Mexican cartels, Russian crime syndicates, and Middle Eastern smuggling networks. These partnerships have allowed the Albanian mafia to grow exponentially, increasing their profits, power, and influence in the global underworld. In addition to drug trafficking and human smuggling, the Albanian mafia has expanded into high-level financial crimes, including credit card fraud, cryptocurrency scams, real estate fraud, and money laundering. By using fake identities, offshore shell companies, and digital transactions, they are able to move millions of dollars undetected, making them one of the most sophisticated and difficult criminal organizations to prosecute. Law enforcement agencies have struggled to combat Albanian financial crimes, as many of their illegal activities are hidden within legitimate businesses, making it nearly impossible to trace the source of their illicit wealth. Despite numerous crackdowns by European and American law enforcement agencies, the Albanian mafia continues to thrive, adapting to modern technology and law enforcement strategies. Unlike other crime groups that have been weakened over time, Albanian clans remain highly secretive, disciplined, and extremely violent, ensuring their survival even in the face of government investigations and arrests. Their ability to blend into legitimate society, run businesses, and manipulate political systems makes them one of the most dangerous organized crime groups in the world today. One of the most alarming concerns for the future is the Albanian mafia's potential expansion into cybercrime and digital fraud. As financial systems become more dependent on cryptocurrency and digital transactions, Albanian criminals are expected to exploit these vulnerabilities, moving into hacking, online fraud, and identity theft. This shift will make them even harder to track, prosecute, and dismantle, posing a global security threat. The Albanian mafia has already surpassed many traditional organized crime groups in wealth, influence, and operational reach, Their extreme secrecy, use of brutal violence, and ability to infiltrate governments and corporations make them one of the most powerful and untouchable criminal organizations in the modern world. As long as corruption, poverty, and weak law enforcement exist, the Albanian mafia will continue to expand its empire of crime, fear, and bloodshed, with no signs of slowing down.